Alright everybody, it's time to finish the mug. So what do we need to do? Well, first, by the way, these UVs are a little bit different than they were before, but that's okay. Don't worry about that because this part doesn't deal with the UV layout. This deals with how to export UVs. And that's all we care about. So let's go ahead and export these UVs. So the first thing we need to do is select your object like so, and we can just go image UV snapshot, and what this is going to do is it's going to basically have the settings for what you want your UV image to look like. So basically we're going to export this little square right here out so that we can bring it into Photoshop and we can put an image underneath it, and we'll know where the image is going to show up based on the UVs. So if that didn't make sense, just keep watching and you'll get it in a little bit. So the first thing I'm going to do is I want to find my path. Like, where do I want this to go? So let's go ahead and go to my D drive, and I haven't set up a project for this, so I have to actually physically click into where I want this to go. But for right now, I'm going to just go into this textures file here, and I'm going to name this UV underscore mug underscore 03. Okay, and it has not saved yet. It just saved the settings right now. So I also changed this to PNG. It's really the easiest to work with because it comes in with the alpha, and that means that you just basically get a layer that has just the UVs on it. And then I can set this to anti-alias lines, turn that off. 2048 is going to be the size of it, right? So that's big enough for this purpose. You could need it bigger or smaller depending on what you're doing. And then we can pick our edge color. So for me, what the heck, I'll pick like blue because I like blue. So that means that these edges will look like blue when they come in to Photoshop. So, all right, this is all we need to set up. Now we hit apply, and then you'll notice that it will say something down here in our little output. So hit apply, and then it says save file to Google Drive, blah, 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 blah. So that's where it's going to save off to. So let's go into Photoshop and let's do a open, and we'll go and find that. So that was _3. As you can see, I've done this a few times. And you can kind of faintly see our lines there. If we zoom in, you can see it better. And I'm going to go ahead and make a layer here. And in this layer, I'm just going to paste in a background color. So let's just switch this to white. I'll hit Alt-Delete, and it'll basically just paste white into the background. So that's all we just did. All right, now that we're in Photoshop, we have to pick which section of the cup we want to put our logo onto. So I'm going to go back to Maya really quick and close that. So I'm assuming that I probably want my logo to be like somewhere in, kind of like this area of the cup. If you think about when people make coffee mugs, they're going to put it so that, well, while you're drinking it, usually with your right hand over your left, so it could be on this side too, that they're going to have a logo there, so you can see the logo while you're holding it with your right or left hand as you bring the cup to your mouth. So that is this section right here. So an interesting thing that we can do is we can actually go to image and UV snapshot again, and this time we can export just this little section. So if I go ahead and change the name here to 3, and then I can call this underscore logo or something like that, so I know that's where my logo is going to go. I can say that out, and you know what, I should probably change the color because I want it to be a little bit different. So let's just go ahead and click in there, and we'll make this red, and now we'll hit apply. And so we get the same thing, a little message that it made a new one. And so we come over to Photoshop, we hit Control O for open, and we grab this, and we can see down here we've got just the little section that we had selected. So if you had polygon selected, or you didn't have you were in the component mode, the faces mode, and you didn't have anything selected, Maya actually won't export out anything. It'll give you an error, but once you start selecting the polygons, it'll do that. So what I'm going to do here is go up to my tab where it says UV mug, and I'm just going to drag this off so it's floating. And then now that it's floating, I can see the one in the background. And I'm going to hold shift and drag into here. And we can close this top one now. And you can see down here, yeah, if I pull it on the top layer, you can see we have that little section that says red. I'm red. This is where I want my logo. Okay, so I'm going to name this UV logo. And I do suggest you name your layers. Take a second every so often to name your layers. And we'll make this one back. Okay, so I know where my logo is going to go, and I have some kind of background color. And so now all I have to do is get a logo. So let's go ahead and I'll hit T to make a text field. And this is going to be simple. I hope you guys do something more creative. But for the purposes of making this short, I'm just going to go ahead and let's just go to like 60 here. And I will just put in Dan. D-A-N, because that's my name. Oh, it's in white, so we can't see it. So let's just change this to, let's make it like a gray. Okay, perfect. And before I close that, I'm going to actually just crunch this down a little bit so that I get the actual size, because I'm going to want to scale this up. All right, so now I hit V on my keyboard, which is the move tool, and I can move it right to the center where I want my logo. I can hit Control T, which will be free transform, and if I hold Shift and I drag on the corner here, it'll drag out in a uniform fashion, so it won't stretch it. If I don't hold Shift, I can actually go like that and stretch it, but I don't want that, so I'm going to undo that. I'm going to hold Shift. If you hit Shift and Alt, it actually goes from the center point, so that's a nice little trick right there. And I'm going to zoom in. Control plus will zoom in, and then I want to tilt this so it is basically kind of going with the curvature. And let's go ahead and just make it a little bit bigger, holding Shift, of course, and like that. So if you didn't know how to tilt it, you can see your cursor when I move it out here around the free transform. You can see it turns into like a little rotate icon, and then you can just click and drag and rotate back and forth. Or if you want to manually set it, you can just dial the numbers in up here on top. So let's just leave it like that, and we'll hit the check. If that check is not showing up, just hit enter and it'll complete it. And so now this is basically what we have. It's very simple. I'm going to just save this out. So let's say I'll do a Targa, and I'll call this, let's call it Mug04 color, because this is going to be our color underscore color, like so. Say save. There's is 24-bit is fine. We don't want the alpha channel, so we leave it 24-bit. Let's close this up. Let's turn this back to object mode. Oh, it's frozen. Come on, Maya. There we go. All right, so let's assign a new material. Assign new material. I'm going to put a blend in there because I want something that has specularity and a bump map that I can put on. So let's go ahead and let's load up that texture. So file, click on that again, and we'll go look for the color, Mug04 color, say open. And now let's just make sure we hit 6 on our keyboard. Oh, so I already had 6 on, so it came right in there. And so if we click on this right here, you can actually see the logo come up in the UV view. But at this point, I don't think we really need the UV view. We'll be fine. So I'll just change back to my classic view, hit F, and so for right now, that's what I've got. It's pretty simple. Let's see if we can make this just a little bit better. Okay, what can we do? Well, if we go back to Photoshop, I was thinking that, I don't know, maybe I can make a bump map for this. So if I go ahead and was to drag this Dan text layer and make a new layer from it, and I was going to go ahead and just make a new layer on top of that, I can grab this new layer, drag it below, and then I can collapse this layer into here to make this a raster graphic, because right now it's a vector graphic, but I want to make it a raster graphic. So I'm going to go ahead and just hit Control E, which will collapse the top layer to the bottom layer, or you can even grab both of them and just hit Control E. It'll do the same thing. And so now I have this as a, here, let's hide that one. Now I have it as a raster graphic, which means that it's basically just a bitmap. It's just pixels. The vector graphic calculates pixels on a mathematical course, so it can be scaled. But this one, if you scale it up too much, you'll see the actual pixels there. All right, so the reason why I did that is I'm going to take this and I'm just going to go filter and I'm going to put a blur on it. So blur, Gaussian blur, let's do that. And you can see we get this little blur, say okay, and then I'm going to bring this guy back out and go like this, put that one on top. Oh, UVs should usually stay on top. You keep those all the way up on top. You can even group these. Control G to group them. Call these UVs. There we go. Now I can hide, or we can keep these out, but then hide them by the group, so then that way you can't see them. Okay, so now I've got this whole thing here, and I actually want this to pop off of the surface instead of recede. But if I want this to pop off of the surface, then I have to make a bump map, and the bump map has to be lighter in this area. So basically what I can do here is I can just select everything, hit Control A, and it selects the whole canvas. You can see there's these little marching ants. And then I can hit Control Shift C, and it's going to just, anything it can see, it's going to select. And, or I should say it's going to copy. That's copy all the canvas, or copy the whole Photoshop file. And then I hit Control V, and it basically just pastes that back in. So now I have an actual copy of the flattened image on top. And then I'm going to hit Control I. And so now I can use this as a bump map. And the reason why I made that little, why I did that blur was so I can just have like a little nice fall off, so the bump map doesn't, it's not too hard and harsh. I could even actually take, yeah, that's fine. We'll try this. Let's see how it works. I could actually make it even softer if I wanted to, but let's see what we got first. So we got the color. So let's change this to bump and spec underscore bump underscore spec. So I'm going to use a bump and a spec for the same texture, basically, or use this texture in the same bump and spec. So let's go ahead and grab this. We'll delete the history now. We can see our blend. We didn't name it. Let's say M underscore mud. Hit enter. And then we already have the color, so let's drop the bump in. It'll just be that same texture that we were just looking at. So we just click on this little box here and there. And now we just grab that. Oh, that's my old one. Ah, you can see what I was doing. I was having a little fun with something else. And so now that I dropped that in, give it a second, Maya is hiccuping again. You can see that looks like it's kind of coming off the surface there. It's got a little bump to it. And if we want, we'll also make it more specular. So let's go back. So the way to go back, there's a couple ways. You could just hit this little input arrow. So we're actually going to go to the back twice, and now we can go over to our specular color, and we can add the same texture in. You actually could just connect it in the graph too, but this is a basics class, so we're not going to get into how to connect stuff in the graph too much. So give it a second, and all of a sudden, all right. So what that's doing is that basically it's making everything on this flat except for this area. I should say the specularity is flat on the cup except for this area where it says Dan. And it looks like my bump, it might be going in. Oh, is it going in or is it going out? Should be going out, but it looks like it's going in. So maybe I grabbed the wrong texture for the bump. It's possible. Oh yeah, I grabbed the color, no wonder. Okay, I want this. Huh. My mistake. All right, so now, oh, you can see that. That's looks a little funky because what's happening is that has to do with like pixels. So we must be getting some grainy pixels on there from where we saved. So how do you avoid that? I guess if we got in really close here, we maybe would see some of those things. Let's turn that off, and let's look at our, let's see. So we had the copy on top of our vector. So let's put our vector on top of the copy. So now we won't get any like faded stuff there. And I'm going to take the copy and actually duplicate it one more time, so we get even more of a fade. Okay, so now I'm just going to take the same thing and do the steps that I did to make this layer again. So I'm going to delete that, and I'm going to go Control A, Control Shift C, and Control V. And I'm going to hit Control I, which will invert my color, and that should work. Let's try that one. I think that'll be a lot cleaner because we have the vector graphics on top. So let's do that and say yes. And in Maya, we just have to go into the material and update it. So if you go into like bump mapping and say reload, you can see, oh, there it goes. It just cleaned up. And then we come back to make sure the spec is reloaded too. I think it reloads everything though once you hit it once, but you might have to make sure. So now when you look at this, it looks more specular on that spot, and it has a kind of lift to it. So play around with this, see what kind of fun stuff you can do. You can do all kinds of textures and patterns and whatever you want. I can make this a lot more, I can make this more highlighted. I could go back into Photoshop and take this and really ramp up the, let's do it this way. Let's put more white into it so it gets more specular. So something like that. Hit OK. Save this again as the spec in the bump and reload it. And we'll be just about done. Oops, hit the wrong one. There we go. Yep, let's save it. Okay, so here we go, reload. Oh, there we go. Now it's way more strong. And by the way, your bump is controlled by this bump depth. So usually 0.3 is a good place to start, and you can go from there. So there you go. That's how you can put a logo on your cup, and I hope you enjoyed this tutorial, and keep on modeling.